and go to keep you up and just go here. Hello, friends. Hello, everyone watching. Thank you for joining me today on Christmas. A Merry Christmas to you. If you don't celebrate Christmas, happy holidays. It could just be, a day of food for you. I could not find my holiday onesie. I'm wearing my couples one later when my husband gets out of work. Then we'll dress up for that later. So as of now, you guys, I get a giraffe. You can't see it's a giraffe, but if this hood goes over my bonnet, you might be able to see. But yeah, you guys get a giraffe. If you're here, if you're watching, please like, comment, and subscribe and share. Please, 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 please do me that favor. And if not, it's fine. I hope you enjoy the video either way. So it's only 33 minutes. I will look for another one after, but as of right now, I'm like, let's watch this one. Maybe if I refresh, that'll give us something better on the screen.
I live on a remote, quiet street in a relatively small town for the sake of my safety and privacy. I will not disclose the town as I still live there to this day. It was the last day of school before Christmas break, and like any other ninth grader, I was excited to be home and play the new Call of Duty that was coming out that year. A little background here: since I was in the 6th grade, I always walked home. Today was no different. I left school around 2:37 p.m., but this time I had to take a different route home, as my street had construction. I remembered a shortcut from when I was a little kid that I used to take to school when my road or usual route was blocked or closed due to some reason. I started making my way down the side road as I did years before when I noticed a black Ford following me awful close, but doing the speed limit probably to avoid suspicion. I took a few turns to see if this vehicle was following me, and sure enough it was. I eventually made it home, and when I did, I told my parents, who then passed it off as being over paranoid, and that was that. Fast forward a few days, and it was Christmas Eve. No sign of that car and no further incidents, until 11 p.m. rolled around, and we were settling in for bed. I remember doing my routine when my dog started barking. I yelled and said, "Shut up." I eventually got up and let them out. I want to say 8 minutes passed when I was startled out of bed, a man screaming in pain outside my window. I looked up to see my dad with a shotgun running outside to the dogs. I rushed out of my bed to the window, and just as I got there, I heard my dad yelling at this guy. And then he shot the back of the guy's black Ford speeding down our road. A police report has been filed, and it's been 4 years since the incident. And I'm now finishing school and looking at colleges. The police never found him, and I still sleep with my dogs by my bed, so the man who tried to ruin my Christmas doesn't come back.
You was cussing out your dog.
Christmas Eve with my 6-year-old son was one of the most memorable nights of my entire life. Sure, we'd had a bunch of Christmases before that, but being a 6-year-old marked the first time that he really started to understand the whole Santa thing. He became completely fascinated with the idea that this fat dude could just, shapeshift down the chimney. Not to mention how he could visit every single child on the planet over the course of one night. He started begging me and his mom to take him to Santa's grotto so he could meet the man himself. And when it came to leaving out cookies and milk, he insisted on leaving out an entire package of Pepperidge Farm, believing the more cookies we gave Santa, the better his presents would be. It was absolutely adorable, and it totally rekindled any of the festive spirit me and his mom had lost over the years. So, on Christmas Eve, we leave out the whole bag of cookies, top up Santa's glass of milk, and then I take him upstairs to bed. He's way excited about the possibility of Santa arriving, which poses something of a problem for me and his mom. If he was still awake when we started putting presents under the tree, he might come downstairs, see us eating the cookies and arranging all the boxes, then his festive fantasy would be totally ruined in my mind. We agreed that was
We're
totally
not even gonna judge
unacceptable,
those
so
Valentine's
we
Day
waited until like 1 a.m.
bags
when
underneath the
he
Christmas
was
tree.
completely out for the count before we dressed the scene like Santa had visited, even including a little note thanking our son for all the cookies, saying he was the most generous little boy he'd ever had the pleasure of delivering to. We were
Probably
so
put those
stoked to
cookies
see
right
his
back in the
reaction
packet.
in the morning, so much so that even we had trouble sleeping that night. But just like our son, the adrenaline subsided eventually and we both drifted off to sleep. The next thing I remember, my son is standing by my bed, shaking me awake and whispering, "Dad, wake up, wake up." I can see the little glow in the dark hands of the clock on my bedside table, and they're telling me it's just before 5 a.m. So as much as it was obscenely early in my mind, I knew I had to get up if I wanted to see his face when he opened his presents. All this is going through my head, and I'm just about getting ready to slip out from under the warmth of the covers when my son says, Dad, Santa's downstairs." My first move is to look over to my wife's side of the bed, but instead of being downstairs like I thought she might be, she's lying there asleep next to me. I'm instantly struck by this uh-oh moment,
Tell him to sit
thinking
down.
that if my son had just heard someone downstairs, like actually heard someone, it obviously sure wasn't Santa Claus. I remember telling my son to wait where he was as I crept towards the doorway, listening out for any sounds coming from downstairs. Believe it or not, it wasn't just his imagination. He was right. I could hear someone downstairs.
I stopped it to say, who knows how many times people get robbed, God forbid, but possibly murdered, all over their child coming saying something and they don't believe. I understand kids have a wild and very vivid imagination, but it takes a few seconds to check. If your kid ever comes up and be like, there's someone weird in the basement, check your basement. You probably have a open crack down there. Sometimes, a homeless man gets in and you need to repair that, or there's mad stuff. If your kid says, oh, there's someone that comes to my window every night, don't be like you're dreaming. Put your kid to sleep and one night wait up in their room, check the window. You know what I mean? Like, it's only 5 minutes in, but if you're still here, like, comment, and subscribe.
By this time, his mom had woken up and she's asking what time it is. But all it took was one look from me as I reached for the little lockbox I kept my gun in, and she just knew something was wrong. She was just amazing about the whole thing too. Just totally affirmed why I wanted to have children with her in the first place. She just started, "Come to mama, come get a Christmas cuddle." And all this other stuff, just completely distracting our son despite him insisting he wanted to go meet Santa. I closed the door behind me, crept towards the staircase, then felt my heart pounding as I started to descend. As soon as I saw the two people crouched down by our tree, I raised my pistol and just growled, "Get out of my house.
Get your ass out of my house."
As soon as they heard me, just growled, "Get out of my house."
Basically the same
thing. As soon as they heard me, they just bolted back out the window they'd pried open to get the presents under our tree. I thank God they didn't put up any resistance, that they didn't even say anything before they just jumped out the window. I know of many other confrontations like that where the homeowner came out way worse, and I thank God every single day that I didn't end up as one of them. To me and my partner, it was nothing short of a miracle that the only casualty of that morning was our son's hurt feelings. He was furious that I hadn't let him meet Santa Claus, and no matter how much we tried to explain that Santa was busy and that he couldn't stop to talk, our son cried and cried, all up until we showed him the special note that Santa wrote for him. And that really did the trick, especially once I improvised the idea that Santa had written the note because he was so grateful, even though he was super busy. Now, me and my partner are still wondering how we're going to tell him about that once he's older. We know it'll be something we'll be able to smile about. I mean, No one got hurt, thank God, and I know it'll be funny to see his reaction to the truth, but in
Just
that
let him
moment,
ask you the questions.
it was just about one of the most terrifying occurrences of my entire life.
Ending with that one, I want to ask, if you have kids, did you put the image of Santa into their heads? And if you don't have kids, are you going to, are you going to do the whole Santa thing with your kids, or are you going to do, these gifts came from mommy and daddy? Because I'm not sure yet. I might do both, just because I want to do the elf on the shelf thing. I find it so cute. Obviously, well, not obvious, but I'm definitely not going to do the over dramatic ones where, they have like a huge mess or something. But if it's like, the kids' room, I'll definitely do, like throw the toys everywhere, the writing on the face, something fun. I don't know. I just feel like it's cute. It's always cute to see, and then it's always, a like an argument with the world because people are like, "Why are you doing Santa?" I don't know. I might not. Who knows?
This took place in 2014 when I was 15 years old, and it's probably the most terrifying thing that I've ever encountered. Let me explain. My family and I live in Atlanta, and we'd occasionally drive up north to visit our extended family in upstate Virginia. It is a very long and boring trip there, but it was worth it as we had only gone to see them once a year and we would be staying for a few nights. This year, they had invited us to stay for Christmas as we had never celebrated it with them before and figured it would be a nice day. To cut to the chase, we get there around dinner time on Christmas Eve and everyone was just about done setting the table for us to eat. After we all ate, my uncle proposed to us kids that we go play manhunt out in the backwoods as long as it wasn't snowing too hard. For those of you who don't know what manhunt is, it's basically like hide and seek flashlight tag. Everybody is divided into two teams. One team is the hunters, while the other team were the runners, and whoever the last person standing was got a small prize. Each of us were equipped with a flashlight while my uncle kept a close eye on us. In this case, I was on the runners team, and my uncle had given my team a good minute to pick a hiding spot. I chose to hide behind an old barrel that was thrown into the woods years ago. Even though it was a little ways into the woods, it was still a great hiding spot. Eventually, my uncle had blown the whistle announcing that the opposing team was coming to find us. I ever so quickly ducked behind this large barrel about a good 25 feet away from the house. After about 5 minutes of hiding, I then began to see that the other team kept on getting closer and closer to my hiding spot, which meant that I had to move quick. I quietly walked into the woods where I was sure they couldn't see me, when I saw the dim glow of an orangish light about 20 or so feet into the woods. At first, I thought that it could have been one of the hunters, but this light wasn't as bright as a normal flashlight, and the other team wasn't in the direction of this light. Being the curious kid I was, I started making my way over to it, wondering as to what it could be. My initial thought was that it was a lantern of some type, but I didn't understand as to why there would be a lantern this far out into the woods. Once I got about 10 feet away from it, right then and there, it randomly shut off, allowing me to see nothing but darkness and the light snowfall. I then thought to myself that maybe I didn't need to see what that light was.
Exactly.
Suddenly, I began to hear heavy footsteps in the snow approach me fast from behind.
Is that your uncle?
With it being dark outside and still snowing, I couldn't see anyone, so I assumed it was one of the hunters.
It's alright.
I ran as fast as I could, a bit more closer to the
Why are
house
you
where
running
I saw
further into
everyone
the damn
crowded around,
woods?
including my teammates. I had asked them what was wrong, and all I remember was my dad and uncle telling me to go back inside. When we did, my mom came to tell me and my cousins that there had been a police officer that came up to the door and informed them about a few locals who reported a serial rapist in the area. My blood ran cold as she told us this, and I immediately explained what had happened to me in the woods. Needless to say, we called the police back, and they have a team out searching in the backwoods. However, they never did end up finding whoever chased me in those woods, and we never found out what that light was. I haven't been back up there since, and neither have my parents, and we don't plan on ever going back up there anytime soon.
Good. If you're curious on what I'm drinking amazing mango from the Boathouse Farms. It's basically just a snack to me, but my husband said, it's supposed to be a meal substitute, so I'm gonna try to drink it for breakfast and see how that holds me over. If you're still here, like, comment, and subscribe. Boom, 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 boom. That's crazy. I can't wait to put on my onesie later.
This story takes place on one of the best nights for kids around America, but one of the worst nights for me. It was Christmas Eve of 2019. For a little backstory, 3 or 4 months before this event took place, I broke up with my girlfriend. The event that caused me to break up with her was she stole over $900 from me. I caught her, and all she said was, before she left, that this isn't over. Fast forward 3 months to Christmas Eve. Since we live in Texas and have a house in the hills, every year on Christmas my family usually goes there to celebrate Christmas. However, this year, I couldn't make it because I had to work. This year I was 17 years old and just got a job by a local supermarket. I had to work all Christmas Day. I had no problem being home alone. On Christmas Eve night, it was getting late, probably 11 o'clock or so. I decided to take a shower and go to bed, as I needed to get up early for the next day. As I started to shower, I heard a strange noise coming from the garage, sort of like a metallic banging or something dropping. I thought it was some form of a heater because I put the water as hot as I could. I took my shower. When I finished my shower, I went to go to bed, and as I did, I heard the noise again. Although this time, it was on the other side of the yard. I was confused because I didn't think there was anything over there. I went to go look outside the window and see. I looked out and didn't see anything but my backyard, completely empty. I completely disregarded it because my backyard is pretty flat and empty, and it has nowhere for someone to hide. Now it's hard to explain, but my window is fairly large, and it has a blind spot to the left where there's a corner where someone could easily hide, but I was tired and didn't think about it. As I walked off, I heard a bang, but this time it was on my window of my house. And as I looked out the window, I saw the figure of a person dressed in all black standing at my window. It made me jump, however, I wasn't too scared as I am fairly a large dude and a high school football player. This all changed when he reached for his pocket for what I assumed was a gun. I ran away from the window toward my parents' room to go retrieve my dad's shotgun. I knew he kept it in the safe and had the safe key under his pillow. As I was running to retrieve this, I dialed 911. As soon as the dispatcher answered, I heard the horrific sound of the glass shattering. I made it to my parents' room, and I shut the door quietly. I whispered into the phone what was happening to the dispatcher. She said to stay on the line as the county sheriff was en route, but it would take about 5 minutes or so. I told her I was going to retrieve the shotgun. She said that's not a bad idea, but only use it if I had to, with caution. I quickly realized my dad took the gun with him because they were going to the gun range. I informed the dispatcher that the gun was gone. She said to make sure to stay on the line. For a moment, everything was silent, and I thought that it may have been a burglar, and they got spooked when they realized someone was home. My heart sank into my chest when I heard not one, but two sets of boots walking up the stairs. I heard a heavy metal pole scraping the floor. I locked and barricaded the door to my parents' room. Then I almost passed out when I heard one of them talk.
Aren't even here.
Not in any voice, but my ex-girlfriend's voice. She said, "Merry Christmas, Tommy." And I heard a male voice mockingly say, "We know you're in there." And he knocked on the door of my parents' room. I almost screamed and got underneath the bed. My ex then said, "Don't worry if you can't open the door. We'll open it for you." I heard the pole hit the door and the lock falling out of the door to the floor. I had to put my hand over my mouth to keep from being too loud. All of a sudden, I heard police sirens and my ex muttering, "Oh shit." They ran down the stairs to run out the front door. When the officer said freeze, I heard a bunch of yelling, and then an officer came in and said, "If you're in there, make yourself known." I called out to him saying I was Tommy, and I called 911. He told me to come out slowly with my hands visible. As I left my parents' room, I saw the two being escorted out in handcuffs. The rest of my night consisted of paperwork and me talking to my parents who were making a 3-hour drive to come home. This incident was very disturbing to me, and I'm grateful that I reacted the way that I did. Had I not, I might be dead right now.
When I was 7 years old, my parents offered me a very unusual Christmas present. We were moving into a new house across the country, right around the holidays, and I remember my parents sitting me down and basically asking, if you could choose any other name in the world to call yourself, what would it be? I thought about it for a second, then decided that the coolest first name I'd ever heard was Dexter. No, not because of the fictional serial killer, more because of the old Cartoon Network show called Dexter's Lab, which centered around the coolest kid scientist in the history of TV. Mom and Dad asked me to really think about it, because I was going to have to use my new name forever and ever. But my heart was set on Dexter's, so that was that. From then on, my parents referred to me only as Dexter, and not by my old name, which was Anthony. It made for an easy transition, and since we were in a new place, people didn't know us by anything else, and it just so happened that our family had a second name too. That would have all been much harder back in Providence, but I was still kind of curious as to why we'd moved and changed our names. It's like a Christmas present to ourselves, my mom said. New beginnings can be a gift. And I suppose she was right. I was much happier in our new home, and soon the weirdest Christmas ever was just a speck in the rearview mirror, so to speak.
Like, who are y'all running from?
It all started in such a weird way, too. Something I didn't understand at all until many years later. I remember getting off the school bus and walking the short distance back to my house when, all of a sudden, I heard a voice calling out to me from a parked car. They were like, Hey kid, you're Tommy's kid, right?" I just nodded. My dad had a lot of friends who all drove fancy cars, so I figured this was another one of his buddies. "What? You don't recognize me now?" the guy asked me. "It's me. Your Uncle Johnny. I was at your communion." I just stared at him nervously, wanting to get inside to get warm, but knowing it would be rude to just walk away. Okay, you're still young, but look, I need you to do me a little favor," the guy continued. "I got a Christmas present for your pops here. Make sure he gets it." The guy then produced what looked like a shoebox. Pretty expensive looking thing, too. I remember wanting to open it to see what was inside, but the guy was quick to cut me off, telling me not to look inside, that it was a surprise for my father. "You don't want to ruin the surprise, do you?" the guy asked, and I responded by shaking my head. "There's a good
Sir,
kid.
I don't care. You just give
Now
me
run
a
along and
present.
make sure you give it to your father. And remember, no peeking, okay?" I was considerably less nervous by that point. I mean, if he had a present for my dad, he had to be a good guy. So I just did as I was told. Took the box into the house, then waited for my dad to get home from work. When he arrived home, I rushed to give him the shoebox. I remember it feeling like it was sort of a gift from me, too. Like if I was delivering it, I was sharing in some of that joy. But when I walked up to him and offered him the box, saying it was from Uncle Johnny, he just said, "Who?" I repeated that it was from an Uncle Johnny, and Dad still had that puzzled look on his face as he took the box from me, took off the lid, and rustled around the papers inside to see what it contained. Then suddenly, he froze, and I remember watching the color drain from his face like it was yesterday. He slammed the lid back on the box, and when I asked what was in there, Dad just told me to go up to my room. Then as I was walking up the stairs, he started calling out for my mom. And that's how this weird Christmas started. The next morning, Mom and Dad were piling suitcases into our car while telling me and my sister that we were going to spend the holidays in the countryside because the snow would be better. The next thing I know, we're in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and I'm getting the very unusual Christmas present of getting to pick a new name. The thing is, at that age, it all just seemed totally normal. Or rather, I know something was happening. I just thought it was something that every family did. After a while, we moved into this new house in another state, and this meant that for the longest time, I thought Colorado and Rhode Island were like right next door to each other. It didn't even occur to me that we'd move far away from home because I couldn't think of a reason why we'd move so far. I remember asking my parents if we're going to change our names the next Christmas, and they told me no, because it'd be hard for all the people in our new town to learn new names, so we'd just be keeping the ones we had. I know it seems crazy, but being so young, I just kind of forgot about the whole thing after a while. Again, I thought it was something every family did at some point, just move towns and pick new names. I thought it was part of the process or something. It didn't make a difference with our parents. Me and my sister just called them the same thing we did before the move, Mom and Dad. I had a little trouble getting the hang of my sister's new name, and I know this is becoming a running theme here, but kids can get used to anything pretty quickly. Then, that was that. For like 11 years. My parents basically covered up what happened to the point where I didn't suspect a thing. I think maybe my sister did, but I definitely didn't. She ended up getting the talk before she moved away to college, and then she was part of this conspiracy too, in cahoots with our parents to keep me in the dark for another 3 years. And then, right when I was picking colleges come SAT time, they sat me down for the talk too. Some of you might have guessed what the talk consisted of by now, and no, it wasn't the birds and bees talk, if that's what you're thinking.
Obviously.
The talk was basically my parents explaining to me that the reason we'd moved out to Colorado all those years ago was because my dad was in the witness protection program. He'd never actually been in the mafia himself. He was just an associate, but things went wrong for him in a big, bad way, and he was dealing with guys who didn't just cut off business ties. They cut off heads and hands so the cops can't identify you. At least, not right away. But anyway, according to them, the mob guys he was working with had two problems. Firstly, they were convinced someone in their organization was a police informant. And secondly, they had no idea who that person might be. So, in order to flush out the informant, they basically set out a bunch of packages to each of them, all containing something that might scare them into making a move. Apparently, my dad wasn't the informant, but he also had no idea that this was part of a larger scheme to flush the mole out. He thought it was a straight-up accusation and decided to get us out of Providence before any punishments could be meted out. So, ironically, the mafia had turned a solid earner into an FBI informant, all by just accusing the wrong person. Now, I don't know if that's 100% true or not. When your parents lie to you for almost your entire life, you wouldn't put another couple past them. But it's the version I chose to believe. But what I know for certain is what was in that shoebox I gave to my dad. It was a rat, and someone had hammered a nail through its mouth.
So you just die. Dramatic.
I've worked as a mall Santa for the past few Christmases now. I'm only 33, but thanks to my complete lack of exercise routine, I definitely have the figure for it. And once I have the beard and the wig and hat combo going, there's basically no telling the difference between me and a 60-year-old dude. Mall Santa work can be tough for a few different reasons. Number one, the hours are really long and the pay can be really terrible depending on which mall you manage to get employed by. Number two, the kids can be little monsters, and their parents can be just as terrible on occasion too. But the reason I'm actually considering skipping the entire thing this year and having something of a budget Christmas is that you get some seriously disturbing things happening from time to time. I mean, the kind of things that keep you up at night, even after a long, exhausting shift. However, the worst thing that's ever happened to me as a mall Santa was actually nothing to do with kids, parents, or terrible pay and hours, and I'm sure you'll see why after I tell the story. So every year, usually when the malls are quietest during weekday mornings, we get specially organized visits from special needs kids or adults with learning disabilities who are bussed in from the surrounding areas. Pretty much every other mall Santa I've spoken to about this agrees that it can be one of the most rewarding parts of the job, and that the adults with learning difficulties are often even more excited about the prospect of meeting Santa than some of the kids are. Literally, the only downside is that some of them are so heavy that my thighs hurt after having like 50 in a row sit on my lap, but other than that, it's honestly one of the best parts of the job. Last year, I'm in the middle of one of the special sessions when I get this girl coming up and sitting on my lap. I say girl, but she was legitimately a grown woman, looking like she was in her mid-30s or something, but she had the mental age of about 9 or 10, all smiles and giggles, way shy about meeting Santa again. It was cute as all get out, but the interaction was not so cute, and turned that way pretty fast. So like I said, she's all giggles and smiles as she comes up to sit on my lap, and I give her the usual spiel, asking her name, how old she is, if she's excited for Christmas and all that stuff. Then, when it comes to asking her what she wants me to bring her on Christmas Eve, she starts thinking about it, smiling at first before she suddenly gets super serious with a touch of sadness. I'm asking her if she's okay, what the problem is, and she's like shaking her head, acting like she doesn't want to tell me anything. I take the time and explaining that no matter what she asks for, I'll try my very, very best to bring it to her, no matter how big or small it is, that Santa always tries his best to bring good little girls and boys what they ask for on Christmas. She takes a moment, then the exchange goes a little something like this. You mean it, Santa? You can get me anything I want for Christmas? Anything.
I can try.
Anything you want. Just tell me and I'll do my best. Okay, well... And at this point, she lowers her voice to a whisper and leans into my ear. I want my boyfriend to stop hitting me. Can you make that happen? I was sort of dumbstruck for a second. Like all of the things I thought she was going to ask, that would most definitely not have topped the list. I remember just nodding at first, trying to find the words, then being like, I'll make that happen for you, sure, no problem. She was so happy to hear that I'd fix it for her, and gave me the biggest hug I think I'd ever received while working as a mall Santa. I had to put on a huge smile, and of all the times I've had to fake being jolly and merry, that time with her was the hardest. But I just felt numb, like completely broken by what I'd heard, and I just tried my best to get through the rest of the session without bursting into tears. I remember all these thoughts rushing through my head, terrifying ideas of institutional abuse. She said boyfriend, and that made it extra creepy. Like, sure, it could have been just another guy in her care group or something, another adult with learning difficulties who she'd hooked up with somehow, but there was nothing to say that it wasn't a member of her care team that was, like, abusing her, in a completely different sense, too. Not just physically, but, well, you catch my drift. So when the session was over, I approached the member of the care team that had organized the trip and had accompanied them to the mall. I didn't let anything slip. I just told them how great I thought the session had gone and asked a few details about the group that had organized them. As it turned out, they were all from the same care home type thing, so I made a note of the name of the place as well as the name of the girl that was apparently being abused. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept picturing some evil monster abusing that poor girl, taking advantage of their position to put some poor special needs woman through torture, then telling her that she'd be killed if she ever breathed a word of it to anyone. And here's where stuff starts getting even more intense. Now, I could have just called 911 with the info I had at hand, registered a general complaint, and then heard nothing back about it. But a buddy of mine had a cousin with the local police department, and not just some gumshoe beat cop either. They were a detective. It took some convincing, but I convinced my buddy to pass along their cell phone numbers so I could get in touch with the dude personally. It took a little while, but I managed to get through to the guy. He sounded pretty skeptical at first and seemed kind of irritated that his cousin had even given me his number, but once I explained what the issue was, his tone changed completely.
I
didn't find this out until way later from my friend, but his cousin had a special needs daughter who was probably going to have to either live with them for the rest of their life or was going to head into a group home at some point so she could have some measure of independence. So when I explained the situation with the special needs girl I met as a mall Santa, it obviously hit the guy right in the feels as the topic was so close to home. The detective tells me that he'll look into it, thanks me for letting him know. I get him to promise to tell me if anything comes of it, and he says yes, and we hang up. And that was the last I heard of it for like a month. Then, after maybe 5 or 6 weeks, I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Christmas was over, the mall Santa job was way behind me, and I was back to working my regular hours as a self-employed mechanic. Then I get a call from a number that seems vaguely familiar, although I wasn't quite sure why. Turns out it was my buddy's detective cousin, who reminded me of the tip that I'd given him about the care company. Of course I remembered, but by that time I really didn't think anything would come of it, but oh, how wrong I was. The detective thanks me for the information, and although he told me he couldn't say too much, he told me to keep an eye out on local media outlets. The next thing I know, it's all over the local papers that there's been a misconduct scandal involving a local care company. I picked up a copy and read the story, only to find out that it's the very same one I had reported. The long and short of it is that the cops had uncovered endemic levels of abuse in the company, stuff that varied from financial discrepancies to straight-up physical abuse, and sickeningly enough, there was even cases of care workers taking advantage of mentally disabled females in ways that were seriously inappropriate. There were numerous arrests, with some of the sleazier and violent criminals looking like they were going to get years in prison for how long they so cruelly taken advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in society. It made me sick to my stomach to read about how some people could bring themselves to do something like that, but it was stopped, and I felt incredible that I'd actually managed to be a part of the chain of events that brought the whole thing crashing down. I just hoped that that poor girl, who was obviously pretty traumatized by what was happening to her, and just not being able to understand why it was happening either, found some measure of peace after it. And in a way, Santa did kind of bring her exactly what she wanted, even if it wasn't on Christmas Day, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is a thought that never fails to make me tear up.
I used to occasionally deliver for DoorDash on the weekends. This happened about a year ago, and at the time DoorDash was new to my area. Not many people used it, but if you worked at the right times, you could still make well above minimum wage.
If you're still here,
it was a Friday night, and I got a request in the app to deliver to a house around 8 miles away. The house was on a deeply wooded back road, with absolutely no streetlights. Like, literally, if you turned your headlights off at this time of the night, you were completely blind. I delivered to a house in this area once before, but that was when it was light out, which, trust me, is a way different scene. I didn't have much for phone service, so it was difficult to find exactly where I needed to be. But after a while, I finally found the place. The house seemed pretty similar to a lot of the other houses in the area, secluded looking, and right on the edge of being able to comfortably call it abandoned. I pulled up to the house. and because of the limited visibility, I decided to keep my car's headlights on while I dropped off the food at the door. But to do this, I had to keep the keys in the ignition, and so I did. I figured it wouldn't be the end of the world if I left my car running for an extra 30 seconds. I took the bag of food to the front door. I knocked a few times, and waited about 20 seconds, when my phone went off. I was getting a call from a blocked caller ID. I decided to answer it in case it had anything to do with the food I was delivering. It was some man who sounded completely normal. He explained how he was the one who placed the DoorDash order.
No.
He then asked me if I could just bring it to him around back.
No, I'll leave
It
it
was
in
already
the front.
sketched out as is, and so I told the guy no way. If he wanted his food, he needed to come to me up front. But to that, the line just went dead. I told myself I'd wait at the front door for one more minute, and if this guy didn't show up, I was just gonna leave. Maybe 30 seconds passed, and the guy did show up. The front door opened, and I looked at the dude. He was wearing a black ski mask, and was just standing there looking at me. I held out the food, but he made no reaction. That's when the guy yelled out, "Alright, now!" Right as he said this, 3 men, also wearing ski masks, came sprinting out from around the back of the house towards me.
You
My
run?
flight reaction kicked in immediately, and I ran straight to my car. I opened the door, put it in drive, and had the pedal to the floor in no less than 2 seconds.
Good
The men
job.
were able to hit my car a good amount of times before I was able to drive off. With what, I don't know, but something strong enough to break my back passenger side window and make a few other dents. Not even a minute into driving off, and I got 2 back-to-back calls from a blocked caller ID that I can only assume were both from the same guy. I let both calls ring until they stopped.
What the hell?
I was shaking uncontrollably and still struggling to regain my composure.
That shaking is
But
crazy.
after a few minutes, I calmed down enough to call the police and report the incident. And that was that. I don't know what ended up happening, and I genuinely don't want to know. I've tried to distance myself from the whole situation as much as possible. It's beyond terrifying for me to imagine what those guys had planned for me that night.
They're gonna
Part of me thinks it was
beat
just to
your
rob
ass.
me, but another part of me thinks they wanted to kidnap me, or worse.
Probably kill you.
This happened back in 2019, on a Friday night in January. I had just gotten back from work, and was honestly way too tired to make my own food. I always heard good things about food delivery apps, and so I figured that night was the perfect night to finally download one and try it out. I just downloaded the first one that showed up. I then made an account, placed an order at a semi-nearby restaurant, and turned on Netflix to watch while I waited for it to arrive. Now, it's worth mentioning that on this night in particular, there was a lot of snow on the ground. The app said the delivery would take around 20 minutes, but I figured that didn't account for the terrible driving conditions. I honestly assumed it would probably take double that. I can't remember exactly how much time had passed, but it finally got to a point where I figured I'd just forget it and cancel the order. But right before I did, I got a message from the driver. Word for word, the message read, "Can't find your house. What's your personal phone number?" Now, you gotta remember, I had just downloaded the app that night, so I didn't know if it was common or not for drivers to ask for their customers' personal phone numbers. But I ended up
You
giving
don't
it to
see
him
that
anyway.
call thing at the top?
Around 10 minutes later, he would contact me, but not over a phone call like I expected. The guy texted me, saying he'd be at my place with the food in 10 minutes. This unsettled me a bit. I was under the impression he needed my phone number so he could call me and get better directions. But I just tried to brush it off. Around 10 minutes later, I would get another text saying he left the food on my doorstep. I went outside to get it and sent a text back thanking him.
That's like,
I figured that was that.
that's 30 minutes,
But
but
around midnight, I would get another text. It was the delivery driver. The text simply read, "I really liked your sweatshirt." This was now getting extremely weird, as the text suggested that the guy had stayed to watch me grab the food from my doorstep. I tried to play it cool, and responded with something like, "Haha, yeah, thanks. It's pretty nice." I can't remember everything that was said next, but it was some string of multiple texts that were something along the lines of, "So how's your night going? What are you up to?" and various other seemingly harmless messages. To these, I didn't respond. At the end of the day, I told myself I didn't know this guy, and I had no obligation to keep a conversation going. So, I just went to bed. But come morning, I would wake up to 20-something texts and multiple missed calls, all from the same number. It was again that same delivery driver. The last text was sent at 3 a.m. And as I scrolled through the texts, two in particular caught my eye.
What'd they say?
One of them read, "I'm outside your house." And the other said, "I can't see anything through your window. It's too dark." But that wasn't even the worst of it. I would later go outside to find footprints in the snow that I knew for a fact were not there the other day. Meaning, this guy wasn't joking. He had actually showed up to my house, and by the looks of the footprints, had walked around it multiple times. I've since moved, and haven't received another text from the number. That was the first and only time I will ever use a food delivery app.
I was about to say, he ruined Uber Eats for you. I wish someone would play on my phone like that from Uber Eats. You gotta spend 30 minutes to get to my house. So I know the food was cold. You know, he's a good citizen, so he probably didn't even, get his refund. From the cold food and the sketchy behavior. Then you gotta text me about my fit. You supposed to drop my food off and leave. And say you're gonna drop the food off and stay in the corner somewhere creepily. Like, now I gotta move because you're a creep. Make it make sense. Because in my head, that's just disrespectful. Gonna bring me cold food, give me a creepy vibe, and then you're gonna come to my house when I'm sleeping? If you're still here, like, comment, and subscribe. Merry Christmas.
I'm 27 and currently out of work. I recently got laid off at my job, as the company I worked for was starting to go under. So, in an effort to keep up with the bills, I started delivering for Uber Eats part-time. A couple of my friends suggested it, and so I figured I'd give it a try until I found another job. To my surprise, it was actually good money. The only thing I didn't like was some of the places the app had me delivered to. I live in a city with a lot of sketchy areas. I try to stay away from those areas while delivering, but there's only so much you can do. This night, a Saturday, I got a McDonald's order. I usually don't accept those ones, but this night was strangely dead. Which was weird, Saturday nights are usually the busiest for Uber Eats. Anyway, I pick up the order and start heading towards the address I'm given. Instantly, I realized it was not in the best area. But by this point, I decided to just suck it up. I pulled up to the house, and right away the vibe was off. It was completely dark with not a single light on in the house. Usually there's at least a light on upstairs, or something that would signal someone being awake and waiting for their order. But the house seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in park, turned off the engine, grabbed the order, and started walking towards the door. I walked onto the porch, and as I reached for the front door, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open. I knocked, and as I did, the door opened slightly more.
Put the food right down.
I yelled out that I had an Uber Eats order, and right away some man walked to the front door, like as if he had just been waiting right there. As he got closer, I got a good look at him. Now, I'm not one to judge a person by their physical appearance, but this guy was practically covered head to toe in tattoos. The guy looked extremely intimidating, definitely not someone you'd want to mess with. He had this look of frustration, or almost anger on his face.
So take your food then.
He was staring at me dead in the eyes. I lifted up the bag of food, and he grabbed it.
And I would have left.
Then started reaching in his pocket.
For what?
I figured he was going to give me a tip. But no, before I knew it, the guy was holding a hunting knife and pointing it in my direction. My stomach dropped, realizing the situation I was now in. I was either going to get robbed for everything I had, or worst case scenario, killed. My mind was now racing. Thinking as fast as I could, I turned around towards my car, screamed at Derek to grab the gun, and put my hand in my pocket to start my car's engine from a button on the key. But there was no Derek, and I was in no way armed. But I figured if I could somehow convince this guy I was, I gave myself a chance to get out of this.
So someone had a knife on you, you said, "Derek, start the car!" Oh, I'm sorry. Derek, grab the gun! Like, you're gonna fidget with your keys? Like, what if he just snatched you in the house? There's no Derek. There's no gun. And you just hope. You just said that he's not someone to play with. You're just hoping. You're hoping right now that he's not going to snatch you in the house. Why not just take off, run? In the beginning, he had 4 people on him. He ran back to his car so fast, got in there and got out of there. The car was damaged. That's the only thing that was damaged. Back window, a few dents. You gotta get like him.
All I could do was pray that the threat, along with the vehicle starting, would be enough to convince this guy I didn't come here alone. And luckily it was. The guy shoved me back and slammed the front door. I ran back to my car and practically tore the door off trying to get in. I got out of there as fast as I could. I would of course end up calling the police, but I never heard anything back about whatever ended up happening. I assumed they didn't find anything, and that the guy was long gone by the time they arrived on scene. But I can't confirm this. If there's one thing I'm sure of, it's how fortunate I am to own a car with a remote proximity key, as I don't think the guy would have bought the whole act if I didn't start the engine. I still drive for Uber Eats every once in a while, but I've since started carrying a knife on me at all times.
These knives look crazy.
The pandemic has been pretty hard on all of us, and we've all felt its effects in a variety of ways, but musicians have felt it more than most. I don't mean to throw myself a pity party or anything. I know there are older folks who are actually fearing for their lives, so I've counted my blessings plenty of times. But for most of my friends, the pandemic just meant working from home or taking a long paid vacation. For me, it meant work dried up entirely. As a professional musician, I've been playing music both solo and with bands for most of my adult life now. It's fun, but it can be really tough on occasion, and this pandemic has been the toughest time I'd ever experienced. I had to do something, anything to pay the bills, so when the drummer in my band said that he was making some pretty decent money for working for Postmates, it immediately sparked my interest. I think the real selling point was how it had benefited his health. Us musicians tend to be much more familiar with a bottle and a glass than an elliptical machine, so riding a bike and getting paid to do it seemed like a great way to get back into a fitness regimen. So, dust off my young brother's old mountain bike, oil up the gears, get myself a Postmates driver's account, and I'm pretty much ready to go. I mean, it's kind of messed up that there were no background checks or anything. Like, I literally could have been anyone, but hey, I wasn't complaining at the time. I needed the money, I needed it bad, and there were much worse things than delivering acai bowls that I could be doing. But being a delivery driver brought a whole host of new occupational hazards, and there was one particular incident in the summer of last year that I've thought about almost every single day since it happened. So, I get this one job delivering Thai food over to a place in Brentwood. Just this little single-story house that barely stood out from the rest. Postmates has us doing the whole contactless delivery thing by that point, but I always used to hang around just to make sure whoever it was got their food. Sometimes you had some pretty elderly people ordering from us, since some didn't have any other means of getting food without exposing themselves. It meant a lot to me to know that I was helping like that, even if it was in such a small way. Anyway, the dude comes out to get his food, and he's not nearly as old or infirm as I first expected, but he does look tired. And not just like my neighbor's dog was barking last night kind of tired. He looked like he was over his own life, just a deep exhaustion set into his eyes.
Take your food.
He thanked me through his mask and told me Postmates had been a godsend since his wife left. I could relate hard to that. My long-term girlfriend had left at the start of the pandemic too. She just couldn't handle the stress. Couldn't be so far away from her parents during such a difficult time, so I knew what he was talking about.
What does that have to do with
like I said,
y'all?
He seemed sick and tired, but he didn't hint at actually being depressed or mad or anything like that. He just seemed to be doing that macho guy thing of internalizing all of his feelings and, again, hard relate. Like I said, I often stuck around to make sure people got their food, and I'd also make a point of thanking people if they tipped big, and boy, did tired guy tip big. Right as I'm about to ride off on my bike, I make a point of telling the guy how grateful I am that he was so generous with his tip. It's literally people like him that mean I don't have to pawn my guitars to pay the rent. He just kind of nods, then says, "Just don't make the same mistakes I did, kid." I wasn't a kid. I was 28, but the weight of experience in the guy's voice, I just took it on the chin. The very next day, I get another delivery up that way, so I decide to cycle past the guy's house. I'm not 100% sure why, I guess I'm a creature of habit or something. But as I roll up, I can already see that something is horribly wrong. There's a cop car sitting in the guy's driveway, and his gate is blocked off with blue and white police tape. There's one cop sat in the driver's seat of the cruiser, and he gets out to ask me why I'm gawping at a crime scene. I ask him what happened, and he tells me to move along before turning his back on me. But then on the fly, I say "But, officer, that's my uncle's place." And I drop the same name he'd used for his Postmates delivery. As soon as I say that,
to the cops.
The cop stops dead in his tracks and turns around and sighs. That's when I know it wasn't just some home invasion or a car theft or something. That's when I knew it was darker than I could have imagined. The cop says something like, "Look, I'm sorry, but you're better hearing this from the next of kin. Besides, homicide doesn't have a full picture of what happened yet." Is he okay? Is my uncle okay?
Boy, stop!
He was taken to the hospital, but after that, I'm not sure. I'm so sorry, sir.
He's dead.
I had to do my own research to find out what exactly actually happened, and to me, it was way worse than home invasion or something. The older guy, the one who'd been so generous with his money and his advice, had a full-on mental breakdown the very same day that I brought him his food. From what I could gather, he'd been ranting and raving in his driveway, and then when the cops showed up, he waved a gun in their faces, and that's all she wrote. They shot him dead right there in his driveway. I don't know if he was trying to end his own life by cop or he actually had some kind of mental breakdown. But if it all happened that same night I dropped his food off, then I basically fed this guy his last meal. The final thing that ever passed his lips.
Basically, if
he ate it. A couple of hours later, he was dead. I don't know why, but that messed with me something awful over the weeks that followed. I kept thinking that maybe if I'd stuck around, maybe if I asked him more about his problems or his life in general, maybe it had given him the strength to carry on, at least for a little while. Or maybe it was always going to happen. Maybe he'd planned it or something, and nothing I could have said would have made a difference.
He just seemed fed up.
For the longest time, those were the kinds of thoughts that I just couldn't seem to shake. Like the guy was a ghost that just haunted me, no matter where I went, or what I did. On the night of the 27th of October, 2013,
I kind of didn't want to end it on that one because it's kind of, really sad, but, well, we'll have another video very, very soon. I hope you guys enjoyed the video with me. These weren't too scary, but definitely, suspicious and, gave off the right spooky vibe. Merry Christmas, and I'll definitely be posting a couple more videos before New Year's. If you haven't already, please check out my The Devil in Me gameplay. I have a whole playlist. That game is making me lose my mind. I will be finishing that game very soon. That way I can play it over. I'm going to play it over until I get as many different endings as possible. Right now, I'm doing it regular, trying to save everybody. I already killed 2 people. You will have to watch the gameplay to figure out who is dead. I'm going to play it back, trying to do all of the bad decisions that I feel like are bad, And then I'm going to try it again, seeing if this, because obviously when I do the bad decisions, we know there's going to be deaths. So I'm going to try it a final time, seeing if I can save everybody, as well as me and my husband are playing it on our couples page. You can check out my Twitch at Elephant Chatting. Yeah, follow me there, subscribe there. That way, if I'm not here recording, well, if I'm not here and a video is not posted, you can check me out there, and I'm probably streaming. Have a great day. Again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I hope you and the ones that you love are having an amazing day. I hope you guys eat amazing food, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Get out of here so I can hold my husband back.